Good evening. Have we been blessed today so far? Sounds like it has. Sounds like we missed out on some fun. My family and I just drove down today. We came from Michigan. We were not prepared for this heat, so hope you don't mind the shirt sleeves here this evening. Our topic, this weekend will be on principles of true education for the family. And we're going to start with some basics this evening. Now, before you decide that this will be a good evening to go get to bed early, don't worry, it won't be boring. We will keep it simple and as interesting and as applicable as possible. Our focus this weekend is, from what I understand, on the family. Am I correct? Yeah. Is that okay? Good. And I mentioned we're talking about true education. So how do these two fit together? How do they connect? In what way? Why should we speak about true education at a family retreat? Well, because family is the heart of true education. The reality is that family is where true education begins. It's where it really starts. They go hand in hand. Let me say it this way. True education cannot be completely realized without the benefit of the family. And yet the family is not complete without true education. They must work together. Adventist Home 142 tells us that in his wisdom the Lord has decreed that the family shall be the greatest of all educational agencies. What's the greatest of all educational agencies? The family. The school? A certain textbook? A perfect curriculum? No, that has yet to be written. A great teacher? A good pastor? A good Bible teacher? A school of the prophets? The best missionary training school that has godly and dedicated teachers, that is converting the young people and sending them forth as missionaries to finish the work on this earth? Is that the greatest of educational agencies? No. It's the family. Because the family has all of these. The reality is that the family is a school. The parents are teachers. They have a missionary training center. They can provide the perfect curriculum for their children based on their God-given unique abilities. They, with the Lord's help, I'm speaking of the family, can bring about the conversion of their children, can send them forth as missionaries, just like the perfect training school would. Because in his wisdom, the Lord has decreed that the family will be the greatest of all educational agencies. Now, don't misunderstand, not the greatest by size, not the greatest by some recognition that the world can give. No, the greatest because of influence. Greatest by what? Influence. Of all the factors most influential in the education of children, it is the family. And this now, we must remember, this influence can be for good or evil. It doesn't have a switch that we can just turn it off. You know, when we want the influence to be good in the family, now it's influential. But when the family's not good, we can turn it off and it's not influential. No, it's always there, always influencing, and it is the single most significant influencing factor in the education of a child. So it's up to us to make it as good as we possibly can. Adventist Home 3:18. The reason why the youth of the present age are not more religiously inclined is, everybody wants to know this, right? Why are the youth of this age not more religiously inclined? Why are the youth so worldly? Why are the youth leaving the church? Why does my son or daughter, why are they not interested in spiritual things? Look, we have libraries written on these topics. Books, volumes, sermons, lectures, we've heard it. The reason why the youth of the present age are not more religiously inclined is, do you want to know why? Lack of piety, I think. Lack of piety? We have a guess there. Do you want me to be honest? Do you want me to tell you what it says, or do you want me to just give you a good, pleasing answer? Okay, you want to know what it says. The real reason their education is defective. Their education is defective. Who is to blame? If in his wisdom the Lord has decreed that the family is the greatest of all educational agencies, then who is to blame? If we hold in our hands the greatest tool for the influencing of our children, who is to blame if their education is defective? We have it in our power to give our children and youth true education. Amen? Mind, Character, and Personality, page 53. Now, as never before, we need to understand the true science of education. If we fail to understand this, we shall never have a place in the kingdom of God. Never what? Never have a place in the kingdom of... Friends, this is salvational. This is not some interesting topic to study on the side. True education also is not just about learning math or science or history or government or any other academic subject. This pertains to our salvation. Let me be clear. True education is not for nerdy people who like studying the finer points of the book Education. True education is not a set of principles to be applied in our schools for the education of our youth. True education is not a dissertation given to a group of conservative Adventists about the glorious beginnings of Andrews University and their failure to follow God's plan. Those are good things. Those are part of true education, yes, but they are not true education. True education concerns our salvation. True education is the process of fitting us for heaven. True education is, we are told in the book Education, is redemption. And if we do not understand it, according to what we just read, not only if we do not understand it, if we do not follow it, we will not have a place in the kingdom of heaven. Do I have your attention? Are you ready to study some principles of true education this evening? If this is a salvational issue, we had best learn all we can about it. So this evening, now I didn't ask how much time I have. Maybe I... Thank you, Keith. I'll take that as permission. We have 4 principles of true education that we're going to cover this evening, and I will try to keep them as applicable and clear and as brief as possible. Let me mention the 4 principles. If you're taking notes, you're welcome to write these down, and then we're going to look at them more in detail. Number 1, principle 1 of true education. True education and redemption are synonymous, restoring the image of God in the soul. True education and what are synonymous? Redemption. Restoring the image of God in the soul. Point number 2 of true education, it is the harmonious development of the physical, the mental, and the spiritual powers. True education is harmonious. Development of physical, mental, and spiritual powers. 3, true education follows the natural schedule that God has placed in us throughout childhood and youth and adulthood, the natural schedule of development. And 4, true education is preparation for service here and throughout eternity. 4 principles. Put simply, redemption, harmonious development, following God's plan of schedule, and preparation for service. So let's work through those individually, and we'll start with the first one. Education equals redemption. Now, I did not make this up. This is not my idea that I just dreamt up one night when I couldn't sleep. This comes from the book Education, page 30. In the highest sense, the work of education and the work of redemption are one. You see, education is worthless if it's not preparing our children for heaven. Amen? No, you didn't hear that. Education is worthless if it's not preparing our children for heaven. Right? Education and redemption must be the same because it's God's purpose that here on this life, here on this earth, we are prepared for the earth, for the life that is to come. And He designs that it should be the development of all of our powers to reflect His character, to reflect His image, and that will prepare us for heaven. So there may be other good goals of education, and there may be other good programs, purposes, but the true and ultimate purpose must be redemption. We also, now remember I said there were two components of this. It's redemption and the restoring of the image of God in the soul. And again, I didn't make that up. Christian Education, page 63. The true object of education is to restore the image of God in the soul. Why? We find the answer to that in the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. God created man in what? His own image. His own image. God created man in God's image. Now, did it stay that way? No. Sin has defaced, nearly obliterated that image. It is no longer clear. So something needs to be done to bring us back to that point at which we are created. And we could take the next 2 hours to explain that whole process. I wish we had the time. But let me just read you from the book Education, page 15. To restore in man the image of his Maker. To bring him back to the perfection at which he was created. We were created with perfection. Something must bring us back. To promote the development of body, mind, and soul, that the divine purpose in his creation might be realized. This was the work of redemption, but not just redemption. This is the object of education, but not just redemption and education. This is the object of life. Redemption, education, life. So the question is, how do we do this? If redemption is our goal, what is the process? Where do we begin? Where is the foundation for this process? Well, we find the answer to that in Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10. It's a verse we all know very well. The fear of the Lord, finish it, is the beginning of wisdom. And the knowledge of the holy is understanding. This is where we start. And it's easy to gloss over this. We think, oh yeah, that just means we need some Bible instruction in the morning. No, this is the beginning. This is the foundation. This is where it all starts and where we have to build on top of. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Now, think about it this way. Every invention that man has ever come up with, every great idea he has ever had, every discovery of science, did that take God by surprise? Was God just like, no way, I don't believe it. I never thought it. Obviously, he's thought of that already. God is the source of wisdom. We are only discovering things that God has already known. So if we go to the source of wisdom, he can reveal those things to us. That is why that must be the foundation. Everything else must build upon that. And we can also find support for this in the Spirit of Prophecy. Christian Education, page 113. The very foundation of true education is the fear of the Lord. We also read, Child Guidance 3:10, the Bible should be made the foundation of education. But we also read, the Bible isn't just the foundation of education. We continue reading, the Bible should be made the foundation of study and teaching. So it's the foundation of education, the foundation of study, the foundation of teaching. Anyone here ever build a house? Oh, wow, we have a bunch of builders here. So, and I'm sure the rest of us have seen a house built, right? We know the process. We understand how it works. So imagine you're getting ready to build a house. We're talking about education here. We're talking about the foundation, laying the foundation in the Bible. Let's apply this concept to the building of a house. You're getting ready to build a house, but you decide, well, you don't decide. You just realize as you look at your bank account that you don't have the money. You don't have enough money for a complete house. Some of it, but not the whole thing. So you think about it and you say, well, how much of this house can I build? I don't want to just stop halfway through. I'd like a completed house. I'd like something I can live in. So let me think, what parts of a house are people going to notice? And you say, well, I need walls. Everybody's going to see whether I have walls on my house or not. All right, so I need walls. I need a roof, otherwise I'm going to get rained on. So you need walls, you need a roof. I need paint, because walls are ugly without paint. People are going to notice that. I need some flowers and landscaping around my house, because, again, people notice those things. I want my house to look nice. But I have an idea. No one sees the foundation. Right? No one sees it. So you decide, you know what? I'm going to build a house without a foundation. Why do I need that? No one sees it. It's not that important. It can't be that important. So you go ahead. You begin your house by just putting the walls up. Do people see that you don't have a foundation? No, you're right. They don't see. Will they see the results of no foundation? Absolutely. When that house starts tipping over, when the roof caves in, they'll say, hey, I think you're missing a foundation there. Let's apply that to the building of character. The world teaches us to focus on things that are external, to focus on things that people see, the things that people notice. So if we think about it from a worldly standpoint, get good grades, graduate with honors, get a good degree, get your PhD, get a good job, make a lot of money, have a nice house, have a car, do the things that everyone notices, right? Then people say you're what? You're successful. But we do the same thing with spiritual instruction. How many Bible verses can our child recite for church? Can they get up there and give a sermon? Can they do special music? We think, oh, this means spiritual success. This means success in the upbringing of my child. That's just the walls and the roof. Those are just the things that people see. Where's the foundation? It's in the heart. And where is that foundation laid? In the family. In the home. Beginning where? In the Bible. It's the simple instruction in everyday life all throughout the day. Remember what Deuteronomy tells us. These things, teach them to your children. In the morning for 15 minutes? No, when you're walking, when you're lying down, when you're sitting, when you're... all the time. Every day, all day, you teach these things to your children. Not for the display they can put on at church on Sabbath, but for the development of the character, building the foundation in the heart. If we want to build a house of character, let's lay a good foundation in the study of the Bible. Child Guidance 41, the Bible should be the child's first textbook. From this book, parents are to give wise instruction. The Word of God is to be made the rule of life. Now let me clarify something. Some people take this, well-meaning individuals, they take this to mean that the Bible is the only textbook for the child. And this is not what the Spirit of Prophecy indicates. The Spirit of Prophecy indicates that the Bible should be the foundation, and that all other instruction should be based in the Bible and founded upon the Bible and should not contradict the Bible in any way, shape, or form. But that doesn't mean that's the only book that they study. Is that clear to all of us? Yes. When you build a house, you don't build the roof and the walls out of the same material you build the foundation, right? You start with that Bible, and then everything else is based on that, but it doesn't have to continue with always Bible instruction. But of course, it should be the majority of the time. The first book is the Bible. We also read in A.U. Gleaner, January 7, 1909, that the first lesson in true education is to know and understand the will of God. Go to the book Education, chapter 31. I believe it's page 269 if you want to understand how to know the will of God. We don't have time to go there this evening. Now, does it end in childhood, or should we continue this into youth? Continue. Are we listening? Should it end in childhood, or should we continue? We should continue. Christian Education 113. Who of our youth can know anything of what is truth in comparison with error, unless they are acquainted with the Scriptures? How can we safeguard our young people against error if we're not teaching them the Scriptures, if we're not giving them experience in the Scriptures, making it the major part of their education? As Education 17 says, instead of confining their study to what men have said or written, instead of studying what other people have talked about the Bible, go to the Bible itself. We have a Bible in our hands. Why do we need to study what other people are talking about the Bible when we have it to study for ourselves? Let's go to the source. True education is Fundamentals of Christian Education 543. I like definitions. Who likes definitions? Okay. True education is. When I read something is, I'm like, okay, tell me what it is. Let's just hear it. True education is the inculcation of those ideas that will impress the mind and heart with a knowledge of God the Creator and Jesus Christ the Redeemer. Very simple. Impress the mind and heart with a knowledge of God. That is true education. By some, education is placed next to religion. Do we do that sometimes? What are some examples? Education next to religion. Well, you have an educational program, a school, follows the program of the world, but we add Bible class, right? Education next to religion. One beside the other. No, that's not the way it is, though. Child Guidance 493. By some, education is placed next to religion, but true education is religion. There's another definition for us. True education is religion. So, Child Guidance 316, we now ask everyone to take hold of this matter interestedly. Anyone here not interested? Here's the counsel. Be interested. Take hold of this matter interestedly. Why? So we shall soon have a place where our children can study the Bible, which is the foundation of true education. The fear of the Lord, the very first lesson to be taught, is the beginning of wisdom. Do your children, that's the question we should all ask. Do your children have a place where they can study the Bible? Now that should start in the home, right? That's where it all can be based. That's a brief overview of our first point. Education is redemption. Education is an inculcation of the thoughts of God and the ideas of God and the mind of God and the knowledge of God into the soul. True education is religion. But our second point, let's spend a little more time on this one. True education is the harmonious development of physical, mental, and spiritual powers. We need to define what harmonious means, though. We had a great trio of violins up here. That was beautiful, wasn't it? Imagine a trio of violins, or maybe let's imagine a trio of singers. We have the melody line, we have the baritone line, and then we have our tenor. And this tenor gets it in his head when he steps up to sing with the group that he's going to sing more loudly than everyone else, and he's just belting it out and the others are singing normal. Is that harmonious? No, we would plug our ears. Oh, please, harmonize a little. Bring your voices together. If we plant 3 trees and 2 of them grow this tall, and then the other ones grow as tall as the trees out here, is that harmonious development? Harmonious growth? No, it's not. So let's apply this to life. If a person studies their Bible for 15 minutes, gets exercise for another 15 minutes, and spends the rest of the day studying, is that harmonious education? No, it cannot be. True education, again, just to illustrate, I did not make this up. Education, page 13. True education is the harmonious development of the physical, the mental, and the spiritual powers. And I want us to clearly understand this tonight as we work through these principles. We have 3 areas of our being. Who we are is made up of 3 parts. Our brains, our bodies, and our spiritual powers. Brain, body, soul, the Spirit of Prophecy calls it, or physical, mental, spiritual are other words that she uses. Different terms used. 3 parts of our being, though, and therefore education must cultivate those 3 areas of our being. True education is the preparation of the physical, mental, and moral powers for the performance of every duty. Christ's Object Lessons 3:30. And so let's look at those 3 individual: physical, mental, and spiritual. Listen closely to this, Child Guidance 360. Both mental and spiritual vigor, which ones? Mental and spiritual vigor, are in a great degree dependent on something else. 2 of them dependent on something else. Mental and spiritual vigor are in a great degree dependent upon physical strength and activity. Whatever promotes physical health promotes the development of a strong mind and a well-balanced character. So, 3 areas of our being: physical, mental, spiritual. 3 areas of education: physical, mental, spiritual. And we're reading here that 2 areas, mental and spiritual, are dependent on a 3rd one: physical. I need a couple volunteers, a couple of young men. Armando and all right, perfect. Just 2 of you. I need you to come stand on this side of me, Armando. All right. We'll get our other volunteer. What's your name? Aaron. All right, Aaron, stand on this side of me. Aaron's a little heavy here. I'm going to have to really brace myself. So I'm going to represent physical, okay? We just learned that 2 areas are dependent on physical. I represent physical. No, you're all right, man. Don't worry.
I'm going to crush you.
No. All right. I want you to stand on your right leg. Put your left arm on my shoulder. Stand on your right leg and lean against me. Support yourself on me, and you do the same with your other leg there. Yep. All right, you can use your left leg if you want. That way you're really leaning on me. There we go. Perfect. Okay, I'm physical. We have mental and spiritual over here, dependent on physical. Come on, lean against me. There we go. Perfect. All right. They're dependent on me. Now, what happens if I jump out of the way right now? They're going to topple over, right? Because they need mental and spiritual need physical to support them. Make sense now, what we just read? Yeah. All right. Thank you, guys. So if we remove physical development from the education of a child, the mental and the spiritual topple. They need to be supported by something. Now, we have a lot of support for this from science. We could spend hours looking at the science of that. Let me give you one study that was done on the benefits of physical activity. Number one, improves overall mental health and quality of life. Who wants better mental health? Who wants better quality of life? All right, physical activity will do that. 2, it enhances brain function and cognition. Who wants a better functioning brain? I certainly do. Physical activity will do that. 3, it improves behavior. Who wants a better behaved child? A couple of you do. Physical activity will do that. It improves concentration. Who feels like they can't concentrate sometimes? Yeah, physical activity does it. In a school that I worked with in Tanzania, where the kids sometimes they couldn't focus, they were just, done studying. We'd say, go outside, run around the school 5 times. When they come back in, they were ready to focus again. Physical activity can improve concentration. 5, it increases blood and oxygen flow to the brain. 6, increases levels of norepinephrine and endorphins, resulting in a reduction of stress and an improvement of mood. You know what else causes the release of endorphins? A good massage. Doesn't that make you feel relaxed? Physical activity can release the same things. And finally, can increase the growth factors that help create new nerve cells. We used to think, neuroscience used to think that we could not grow new nerve cells. We now realize that through physical activity, it can encourage new nerve cells to grow and support plasticity in our brains. Another study found that children who were more active had larger hippocampuses, and the hippocampus is the part of our brain very responsible for memory and spatial navigation. Another study found exercise provides an unparalleled stimulus, creating an environment in which the brain is ready, willing, and able to learn. Did God have a reason for telling us we needed physical activity? He knew it was essential for our development in terms of the other 2 areas dependent on it, but he also knew from a physical standpoint it would develop the health of our brains and our bodies, of course. Now we read in the Adventist Tome 508, the time of study must be divided between the gaining of book knowledge and a securing of knowledge of practical work. Divided. What does it mean to divide something? Yeah, you break it apart. Okay, but in what proportion? Let's suppose you have a piece of cake, vegan cake, don't worry. And you're just excited about this, and all of a sudden the door opens and in comes your friend. I wanted to eat this cake for myself, but now I'm going to have to share it with him. And he said, hey, you've got some cake here. Let's share this. Hey, divide it with me. You say, okay, sounds good. And you take your knife and you shave just a tiny little sliver off the edge. Is he going to be happy? He's like, no, man, I said let's divide that. You're not being fair. What does it mean to divide something? You cut it in half, right? Or at least equal portions, if we're dividing in 3, we'll cut it in 3 parts, or 10 in 10 parts. So when it says divided between book knowledge and practical work, we're going to do what? We're going to cut it in half. And here Ellen White speaks of the work at Avondale College where they did exactly that. And she continues to say that the Lord blessed the students who followed that plan. And we need the Lord's blessing on our education. Now, physical training could be further divided into 3 areas. We have useful work, manual training, and the health of the body. Useful work are those practical duties in everyday life, cooking, cleaning, doing laundry. Those are all valuable things for children to learn. There's also manual training where we are training a specific skill that they can then go on and support themselves with. And then the health of the body where we learn to keep our body healthy. I want to talk for a moment here about useful work because it brings up something else that is very important, a deep principle not only of true education, but of living. Let me read you something here from Counsels to Teachers 308. The greatest benefit, now we want the greatest benefit, right? Okay. The greatest benefit is not gained, so whatever we're about to read, this is not what we want to do. The greatest benefit is not gained from exercise that is taken as play or exercise merely. There is some benefit in being in the fresh air and from the exercise of the muscles. So there's nothing wrong with those things, not that they're bad, but that's not where we're getting the greatest benefit. Where do we get the greatest benefit? It says, let the same amount of energy, that same amount of energy that we put into those play and the games, put that same amount of energy into the performance of useful work, and the benefit will be greater. This highlights a principle of true education, that of developing unselfishness. Because really when we read here, taken as play or exercise merely, that is the conventional method of physical development in education. Am I right? Yeah. Play, exercise, sports. Look at any college or university. Those are the things that they engage in, just exercise or play. And it says that's not where we get the greatest benefit. So as I mentioned, this brings up another principle of true education, and that is selfishness versus unselfishness. Let me read you something from Education, page 154. Unselfishness, the principle of God's kingdom, is the principle that Satan hates. Its very existence he denies. What does he deny? Unselfishness. He says unselfishness is not even possible. Because in the very beginning, what did he accuse God of? Being selfish. He says, see, the creator of the universe, the one who runs this thing, is selfish. And let me finish this. Unselfishness, the principle of God's kingdom. No, I do not want to rate the Ellen White app. All right. Unselfishness, the principle of God's kingdom, is the principle that Satan hates. Its very existence he denies. From the beginning of the great controversy, where did that begin? In heaven. From the beginning of the great controversy, he has endeavored to prove God's principles of action to be selfish. And he deals in the same way with all who serve God. To disprove Satan's claim is the work of Christ and all who bear his name. Amen. Satan says, unselfishness, not only do I not believe in it, I don't think it exists. In fact, God himself is selfish, and all of God's followers are selfish, and so we take on God's name. We say we're Christians, and what have we just said? Unselfishness is possible, Satan. We're going to prove you wrong. And yet, how do we live our lives? Do we live our lives? Do we follow an educational plan, a lifestyle plan, a way of living, a way of acting, a way of being that is unselfish? Do we? We also read in education that unselfishness underlies all true development. It's the basis of education. Unselfishness is the basis of true education. Through unselfish service, we receive the highest culture of every faculty. More and more fully do we become partakers of the divine nature. Wasn't that our goal to begin with? Being a partaker of the divine nature, restoring the image of God in the soul. And we read here, unselfishness is the very foundation of the process of restoring the image of God in our souls. But let's contrast this with worldly education. Education 225. At such a time as this, what is the trend of the education given? To what motive is appeal most often made? What's the motivating factor? That's what this is asking. What is the motivating factor in conventional education today? Very clearly it says, to self-seeking. Let me read you something here from Studies in Christian Education, one of my favorite books. If you've not read Studies in Christian Education by E.A. Sutherland, you need to between now and next week. It's urgent. I do have some copies with me if you're interested in those. Studies in Christian Education takes a very good look at false education and the process of false education and how that has held back the work of the Lord in the finishing, and how we could be in heaven by now if we had followed true education. That was a brief synopsis. He talks here about the papal system of education. Now listen to this description. Tell me if it sounds familiar. Nothing will be more honorable than to outstrip a fellow student, and nothing more dishonorable than to be outstripped. Prizes will be distributed to the best pupils with the greatest solemnity. Anyone been to a graduation lately? It's modeling the papal educational system. Now, before you start pointing fingers out there, let's bring this closer to home. Education 225. In God's plan, there is no place for selfish rivalry. I mean, that makes it really simple, doesn't it? There is no place in God's plan for selfish rivalry, for one-upping someone else. Those who measure themselves, 2 Corinthians 10:12, those who measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves among themselves are not wise. But how widely different is much of the education now given. From the child's earliest years, it is an appeal to emulation and rivalry. It fosters selfishness, the root of all evil. In our institutions of learning, there was to be an influence, and institutions of learning can be our homes also. There was to be exerted an influence that would counteract the influence of the world and give no encouragement to the indulgence in appetite, in selfish gratification of the senses, in pride, in ambition, love of dress, love of display, love of praise, love of flattery, the strife for high awards and honors as a recompense for good scholarship. All of this was to be discouraged in our schools. To put it just, plain and simple, false education develops selfishness. True education develops unselfishness. It really can't be much more clear than that. So the question we need to ask ourselves in our lives, are we working for the benefit of others, or are we working for the benefit of ourselves? In our life goals, in the destination, in what we're working toward, are we working for the benefit of others, which will finish the work on this earth, or are we working for the benefit of ourselves? In our play, in our recreation, are we focused on benefiting others or benefiting ourselves? Are our lives, our play, our activities, are they competitive in nature? This is false education, according to what we just read. Don't throw any tomatoes at me. I'm just reading what the Lord's servant has given us. So, as I mentioned, I brought that principle in as it was connected with the development of the physical aspects of our natures, because the world tends to put, Satan has placed a counterfeit on physical development because he focuses on competitive sports. And we can have a different focus on useful work. And here we read, physical employment is part of the training essential for every youth. An important phase of education is lacking if the student is not taught how to engage in useful labor. Students should not be permitted to take so many studies that they have no time for physical training. Isn't that what we do, though? We have a student who loves to study. They're getting good grades. They enjoy the books, and we just push them into it. Study, study, study. Come on, excel. Get to the top. Go for your PhD. Not that those things are wrong, but it says we should not even allow them to take so many studies that they don't have time for physical training, because it is part of true education to have physical training also. The health cannot be preserved unless some portion of each day is given to muscular exertion in the open air. Stated hours, not minutes, hours should be devoted to manual labor of some kind. And we need to recognize that this is not just for some skill that you gain, some sort of, exercise or health. This is for character. God has designed this to develop our characters because he wants us to be whole beings. Put very simply, Review and Herald, March 13, 1900. Every man, woman, and child, did we leave anyone out? Every man, woman, and child should be educated to practical, useful work. That's useful work. Remember I mentioned physical development could be divided into useful work, manual training, and health of body. Let me touch on manual training for a moment. We read in the history of Israel that you could be the richest person in the country. You could have no need for your children to ever engage in any sort of manual labor or need any sort of skill to support themselves. And yet, God commanded every Israelite family that when their child left home, they had a skill that they could rely on, a practical skill that they could support themselves with. It was deemed, we read here, an indispensable part of their education. And so, where should we begin manual training? Let me read you this, Child Guidance 3:20. When the child is old enough to be sent to school, the teacher should cooperate with the parents, and manual training should be continued as part of the school studies. So, if it's to be continued when they reach school, then where did it start? In the home. Does it stop when it reaches school? No, we just read it's supposed to continue. So it's supposed to be for the entire educational process of the child. And then, Every youth on leaving school, Child Guidance 357, every youth on leaving school should have acquired a knowledge of some trade or occupation by which, if need be, he may earn a livelihood. Now, there are lots of physical activities. There are many types of manual training out there. Do we have any counsel as to any ones that are better than others? Yes. I heard a yes. Do we know which one it is? Which one is named as the best of all those? Gardening. Absolutely. We read Child Guidance 356. No line of manual training is of more value than agriculture. Put very, very simply. Why? Well, again, we could spend a whole nother hour on this topic. Let me read you here what, again, E.A. Sutherland in his book Living Fountains or Broken Cisterns. God planted a garden in Eden. You ever think about that? Where did God put Adam? Adam was a king. Kings live in palaces, don't they? Not Adam. God planted a garden in Eden, and from the beauties of the earth chose the most beautiful spot for the home of the new pair. Beneath the spreading branches of the tree of life, God himself visited with them and talked with them face to face. As they ate of the fruit of the tree of life, they found every physical want supplied and were constantly reminded of the need of spiritual meat, which was gained by open converse with the light of heaven, according, notice, to the divine system of teaching. This was God's program of instructing Adam and Eve in the garden. According to the divine system of teaching, they were here to study the laws of God and learn of his character. Again, science has shown us many benefits of children being in the garden. Studies have found that children who were involved in gardening had better self-confidence, a better sense of self-worth. They were more patient. They were more persevering. Now, isn't that obvious? I mean, you can't get a smartphone, get the Grow Tomatoes app, push a button, and out comes tomatoes, right? That's not how you grow tomatoes. Any gardeners here? Okay, great. You don't grow tomatoes that way, am I correct? All right. So, of course, it teaches children to be more patient and persevering. That, to me, was a no-brainer. Children were found to have better science understanding, better test scores, and actually be overall better learners. Gardening was found to help with reading, with mathematics, with spelling, with written language skills. No apparent connection between them other than the strengthening upon the brain. Part of the reason for this is a bacteria. Maybe some of you perhaps have been to my seminars. You know what this bacteria is called. We have good bacteria and bad bacteria. There's a bacteria called Mycobacterium vaccae. Have anyone heard of this? A few of you, very few of you. All right, let me tell you about this bacteria. It's been found to reduce depression. Anyone want some of that? All right. It also improves lung health. So now we have two factors, reducing depression, improving lung health. Boosting the immune system. It even fights cancer. We could stop right here. This is amazing stuff, but it doesn't stop there. It strengthens the digestive system, treats arthritis, improves emotional and mental health, lowers stress and anxiety, reduces allergies, and can even raise your IQ. Who wants some of this Mycobacterium vaccae? Now, can you go to the health food store and get some of it in a pill? No, unfortunately not. Where do we get it? Dirt. So do we need to eat some dirt? No, thankfully not. We can put our hands in the dirt. It's been found that we absorb it, as well as going barefoot, as well as growing the vegetables. The skin of the vegetables can absorb some of this bacteria. If you're growing organically, don't bother scrubbing them too hard. You'll benefit from eating them straight out of the garden. One study found this bacteria had the exact same effect as an antidepressant drug such as Prozac. Same effect in the brain at a chemical level. And it was also found when they fed it to mice that these mice would navigate a maze twice as fast. They were half as stressed. So powerful stuff. Getting dirty actually makes you smarter. So don't get upset about your child liking to play in the mud. Just think about how much smarter they're getting. All right? It's good for them. Other studies have found that exposure to bacteria, the natural bacteria of the great outdoors, will cause an immune response that can actually suppress asthma and allergies. So they found, for example, children who live on farms have half the incidence of allergies and asthma as children that live in the city. And we usually think it's the pollen and the dust, outdoors that's causing the allergies and asthma. No, if exposed to it from a young age, it can actually trigger an immune response to protect them from allergies and asthma. So many more studies we could look at on the benefits of gardening, but let's finish that point with what we're told in child guidance. In childhood and youth, practical and literary training should be combined. Can you combine practical and literary training in the garden? Yeah? Okay. How?
You read whatever you want to plant, for example, learn about it, and then go out and do it.
Okay. Learn about what you want to plant, go out and do it. Can you teach any math in the garden? Oh, give me some examples.
How many rows? Like when
How many rows?
Charles, when we're putting the seeds in the, when we're starting the seeds, how many rows and how many,
Exactly. You get some division there, you can do multiplication, subtraction. Yeah, you got all the mathematical concepts there. Geometry, right? Measuring area, calculating. You don't have to do them as part of gardening. It's not like it's necessary, but it's a great opportunity to combine the practical and the literary training. Science. Can you teach science in the garden? Well, it's a great science classroom. Instead of looking at the textbook about the anatomy of a flower, go pick a flower and dissect it, right? Real life education. Combine practical and literary training. Okay. Sorry, I missed one here in my notes. Pamphlet 140, paragraph 7. The Garden of Eden was not only Adam's dwelling, but his schoolroom. Oh, wow. This was a schoolroom for Adam. Can it be a schoolroom for us? Yeah. It is. If Adam needed it, we need it even more. And of course, the quote you probably know very well: study in agricultural lines should be the A, B, and C of the educational work in our schools. This is the very first work that must be entered upon. I don't know how many schools I've worked with, though, that have said, once we get the buildings up, once we get a good faculty, once we get a good student base, once we get a good program going in our schedule, we'll start an agriculture program. That's backwards. Start the agriculture program and live in a tent if you have to, because that is the very first work that should be entered upon. It's not that agriculture is true education, but it makes true education easier. Is that clear? We don't want to get wrapped up in the idea that if we're in the garden, we're doing true education. No, but it makes true education much easier. It is part of true education. I was talking with a friend of mine, a teacher, recently about, we were just lamenting the fact that so many of our schools had removed the agriculture and practical training programs from our schools. And he said, he asked me, he goes, why are they doing that? I said, well, they all say they don't have money. Or they say the program's not making any money. Have you heard this? Yeah. Oh, the program's not making any money. We can't keep it. He said, yeah, that's what they all say. He said, why doesn't anyone ask if history class makes money? Why doesn't anyone ask if math class is making money? Because we view those things as fundamental to education, right? We don't even think about asking whether math class isn't making us any money, we better get rid of that. No, we think it's necessary, and so we keep it, whether it makes money or not. So evidently we're not viewing agriculture as fundamental to education if we're dismissing it as soon as it's not making money, right? We need to shift our perspective and realize that it is fundamental to true education, and if we believe it as fundamental, we won't even consider whether it makes money. And then my friend ended, though, with the little punchline, though. He goes, there is a potential that the agriculture program could make money, but I've never seen math class make money. So he had a point. Now, we've seen useful work, manual training. Now, let me touch on health of body for a moment. That's our third component of physical development. We read, children should be early taught in simple, easy lessons. The rudiments, what are rudiments? ABCs, the basics. Children should be early. When is early? Early, very young, right? from a very young child. They should be early taught in simple, easy lessons, the basics of physiology and hygiene. The work should be begun by the mother in the home and faithfully carried forward in the school. They should understand the importance of guarding against disease. They should learn how to deal with common diseases and accidents. They should be given instruction in physiology and hygiene and be provided with facilities for illustrating the structure, use, and care of the body. Very simple, practical stuff every one of us can do in our homes. Teach them to keep their bodies healthy. Teach them how to protect against disease. Teach them to treat the common ailments and injuries. And it will well, for one, it's part of true education, but it's also part of preparing them for life. And before I finish up with this section on the health of the body, I'd like to share with you something again from Dr. E.A. Sutherland in his book, Studies in Christian Education. In that book, Dr. Sutherland explains the history of Oberlin College. Has anyone heard of Oberlin College? A few of you. Perhaps you've read this book. Oberlin College was begun, I think it was the 1830s, if I remember right, early 1830s, and for several years was a bulwark of true education. They were not Adventist, but they had a focus on preparing missionaries, and they followed, even before we had the light on true education, they followed a very excellent program of true education with manual training, with practical skills, with the development of spiritual strength and a preparation for service. They were doing an excellent job. They also had a fascinating philosophy on diet. Now keep in mind, this is in the 1830s, 40s maybe, before we had the council on diet. Let me read you their description of what was to be served in the cafeterias. Listen to this. Tell me if it doesn't sound familiar. Vegetables and fruit should constitute the substance of every meal and should be eaten as nearly as may be in their natural state. Bread should be made of whole wheat flour, and rice should be plainly cooked. Flesh meat and fish in all forms had better be banished from the table. No fat or gravies are to be tasted, nor any liquid foods like soup or broth. Pastry is an abomination, and cakes in which any fat or butter has been used. Bread should be at least 12 hours from the oven, and 24 hours are better. And as for condiments, pepper, mustard, oil, vinegar, etc., and stimulants like tea and coffee, they are to be by all means eschewed as deadly foes to health. Wow. Sounds like counsels to diet on foods, right? But what is probably the most poignant lesson from this is that while they followed these principles of health in their cafeterias, they were a successful school. I mean, they were pumping the missionaries out. They were doing the work of the Lord around the country, around the world. But there came a time they said, this isn't that important. How much is diet really affecting us? And they began to, let's allow some tea and coffee. That's not that big a deal. Don't worry about the condiments. And next thing you know, it was flesh foods. And it was at that time, within a couple of years, that the school went into decline. It's a lesson for us. We've been given health reform for a reason. It is to make us successful. Okay, I'm taking way too much time on this physical training. It's important, though. We need to realize how important it is. Let's touch on mental culture for a moment. And again, let's remember, false education is what? Unselfishness. True education, I said that wrong. False education is selfishness, developing selfishness. True education is developing unselfishness. Same here applies to mental culture. Doesn't the world focus on mental culture? Absolutely, that's their goal. Become successful. Why though? To be somebody in the world, to get that good job, to be a leader, to be the intellectual leader so you can make a lot of money. They focus on selfish success. Is the Christian's goal different? Should he focus on mental culture? Absolutely he should. There's nothing wrong with focusing on mental culture, but his purpose is different. Listen to this. Christian Education 51. He is a Christian. Are we Christians?
Yes.
He is a Christian who aims to reach the highest attainments. We're aiming for the highest attainments. Nothing wrong with that. But we have a different goal. He is a Christian who aims to reach the highest attainments for the purpose of doing others good.
Amen.
We aim to be the best we can be so we can benefit someone else. This is not for our own selfish benefit. Now let's contrast this with the false system of education. Here again, Studies in Christian Education. Looking at the papal system of education, it says the memory was cultivated as a means of keeping down, of suppressing free activity of thought and clearness of judgment. We don't want people to think. Just teach them to memorize things so they don't think for themselves. It sought showy results by which to dazzle the world. Selfishness. A well-rounded development was nothing. The Jesuits did not aim at developing all the faculties of their pupils. Remember, looking at the harmonious development of physical, mental, and spiritual, the Jesuits, they did not aim at developing all the faculties of their pupils. When a student could make a brilliant display from the resources of a well-stored memory, he had reached the highest points to which the Jesuits sought to lead him. Fill your mind with facts and information. When you can regurgitate that in a brilliant display, you've reached the pinnacle of education in this system. Originality, independence of mind, love of truth, the power of reflecting and forming correct judgments were not merely neglected. They were suppressed in the Jesuit system. And let's contrast this with the Ministry of Healing 449. It is not well to crowd the mind with studies that require intense application but that are not brought into use into practical life.
Amen.
We need a way to use the information we've been given, right? Such an education will be a loss to the student. It is not enough even to have knowledge. What? It's not enough to have knowledge? Don't we love just getting knowledge? No, that's not enough. We must have the ability to use the knowledge aright. And again, contrast this with the papal system. The papal system of education makes teachers content to repeat set lessons to their students as they themselves learn them in school with no thought of making practical application. The students in turn go out to teach others the same rote they have learned, and thus the endless treadmill goes on, ever learning but never getting anywhere. The Bible talks about this, right?
Yeah.
Ever learning but never coming to a knowledge of the truth. That's a false system of education. Put very clearly, Ministry of Healing 402, it is the use they make of knowledge that determines the value of their education. If we want an education that has value, it must have knowledge that can be put to use, practical use in real everyday life. I don't want to run on the endless treadmill of this world, do you? I want to get somewhere. Let's finish this thing. Let's impart a true education to our young people so that they can finish the work. So we've seen physical training, we've seen mental culture. Let me just touch on spiritual development. We've already done that to a great degree as we've looked at how education and redemption are the same. But let's just remember the importance of character development. A character formed according to the divine likeness is the only treasure we can take from this world to the next. Any effort that exalts intellectual culture above moral training is misdirected. So if we're focusing on developing the minds of our young people without developing their spiritual powers, that's misdirected. Okay, remember we've had 4 main areas of education. We've seen true education and redemption. We've seen the harmonious development. Now let's touch on our third area, and that is true education follows the natural schedule of development. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verse 1 tells us something about a schedule, doesn't it? It says, to everything there is a time. Sorry, no, it doesn't. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. There's a schedule, and God has placed in our bodies, in the development of the brain, a natural schedule. Now, I have an entire series where I can, I'll go for 3-4 hours as we look at the natural schedule of the development of the brain. We don't have time to get into that tonight. The principle, though, that we find is Education 41. True education is not the forcing of instruction on an unready and unreceptive mind. The mental powers must be awakened and the interest aroused. So, education is not, well, let me say it this way. Greek education focuses on knowledge that can be poured into the mind of the student. Papal, Greek, Egyptian, all the names, they mean the same thing. Pour the information into the mind of the student. True education does not just pour information. It seeks to train the child, to inculcate the information that can be applied into everyday life. Now, we find a parable that illustrates this to us in the book of Mark, Mark chapter 4, verse 28. First the blade. What comes next? First the blade, then the ear. I heard it. Yeah. First the blade, then the ear, then the full corn in the ear. Now, when you go and you plant corn, do you go out a week later and you see your little corn shoots coming up? And you go, no, I wanted corn. Why don't I have corn? I planted corn and I don't have corn. Is that what you do? No. When you see those little corn plants growing up, what do? Yes, it's the promise of corn. Aren't they beautiful? Aren't those little plants so beautiful? Why are they beautiful, though? I mean, do you eat them like that? No. They're beautiful because they have a promise of something that will mature. And let me see if I can explain this. Let me read this next, and then I'll get to that explanation. Education 106. The gradual development of the plant from the seed, this parable in Mark, is an object lesson in child training. He who gave this parable created the tiny seed. He gave its vital properties and ordained the laws that govern its growth. The little one should be educated in childlike simplicity. We don't expect corn from a little corn plant, right? Do we expect full maturity from a child? We cannot. The little ones should be educated in childlike simplicity. Childhood answers to the blade in the parable. It tells us right here very clearly what represents what. Childhood is like the blade. That's the first step. And the blade has a beauty peculiarly its own. Children should not be forced into a precocious maturity, but as long as possible should retain the freshness and grace of their early years. So when you go out to the garden, you say, great, I have some corn growing. I won't get upset about the fact that I just have corn plants, but I'm going to hurry them along a little bit because I really want some corn sooner than this is looking like I'm going to get corn. So you reach down there, you take the top of the plant, and you start pulling it to help it grow faster. Is that going to work? What are you going to do? You'll kill it. You'll destroy it. We do that same thing with childhood. We expect, and especially in worldly systems of education, we ask these little ones to engage in tasks for the mind that they're not ready for. We're damaging the beauty of their early development. Now, let me read you exactly what I'm talking about. Christian Education, page 8. Parents should be the only teachers of their children until they have reached 8 or 10 years of age. That's childhood. That's the blade. That's the little corn plant. And we can't go uprooting it, placing it somewhere else. No, parents should be the only teachers until 8 or 10. As fast as their minds can comprehend it, they should open before them God's great book of nature. And the only schoolroom until 8 or 10 years of age should be in the open air amid the opening flowers and nature's beautiful scenery and their most familiar textbook, The Treasures of Nature. That is the ideal plan for childhood. But we say, no, I want maturity sooner than that. And we go trying to pull on these precious, beautiful little children that aren't ready yet. And we damage the ultimate development. You know, when you pull that corn plant up, you say, oops, I guess that's not a good way to accelerate this development. And you plant it back. Will it survive? No. Sure. Sometimes it'll survive. Sometimes it won't. But often it will survive. But it's forever damaged. And we don't want to run that risk. Science tells us that the first years of a child's life, the development of spirituality, of emotion, of relationship skills, of behavior management skills, of language and memory abilities, of moral understanding, most importantly, though, of conscience and character development. Is this an important list? Do we want our children deficient in conscience and character? No. These abilities develop in the first 7 years of a child's life. We need to focus on what is important at the time that isn't important. And not try to mix up the development, not try to accelerate the development. Because the lessons learned, Child Guidance 184, the lessons learned, the habits formed during the years of infancy and childhood have more to do with the formation of character and the direction of life than have all the instruction and training of after years. This is an important time, and we need to value it for its unique beauty. God has a schedule. And fourthly, finally, our final point of true education, preparation for service. Again, I didn't make this up off a whim. Education, page 30, true education prepares the student for the joy of service in this world and for the higher joy of wider service in the world to come. Ministry of Healing 395. Some of you said you like definitions. Here's another definition for us. True education is. We're going to make it clear again. Ministry of Healing 395. True education is. Now, what do you think? Someone finish the sentence. There's not necessarily a wrong answer. True education is, what have we read already?
The development of those three.
Okay, the development of those three areas. Very good. That would be a correct definition. It's not the one we find here, but that's correct. Another one. Developing unselfishness. Yes, absolutely. Preparation for service. Yeah, you're getting close. True education is restoring the image of God in the soul. Yes. Again, not the one here. Redemption. To impress the heart and the mind with the knowledge of God. Absolutely. Unselfishness. These are all correct answers. You want to know what it says in Ministry of Healing, though? That's true also. True education is missionary training. Wow, we just added a whole other component to true education, didn't we? True education is missionary training. Every son and daughter of God is called to be a missionary. We are called to the service of God and to our fellow men, and to fit us for this service should be the object of our education. We're told in the book Education, go into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. That's Christ's command to his followers. To all, great or small, learned or ignorant, old or young, the command is given. It's not optional. It's part of being a Christian. If we are a Christian, we're a missionary. Let me say it differently. If you're not a missionary, you're not a Christian. So, how do we develop a missionary spirit in our young people? We find the answer to that in Counsels to Parents, Teachers, and Students. There's a section in the 540s. It's around 544 through 548, I believe. It tells us it is necessary to their complete education that students be given time to do missionary work. Okay, here we find the first principle. What do we need to give them? Time. Not expect them that once they finish with their schoolwork, they'll go find some time. No. We make it a part of the curriculum. We make it a part of the schedule. Time to do what? Missionary work. Okay, so do we need to send them off to India every couple of weeks to do mission? What kind of missionary work are we talking about? Well, let's keep reading. It makes it very clear. Time to become acquainted with the spiritual needs of the families and the community around them. Time to do what? Become acquainted. The book Education tells us there are 3 steps to a desire for missionary service. It says it is acquaintance that awakens sympathy. Acquaintance awakens what? Sympathy. And sympathy is the spring of effective ministry. 3 steps there. Let's illustrate this with a practical example. Suppose imagine at your home. Makes a little more real life here. Suppose every day you saw somebody walking by your house carrying a bag of groceries. Are you going to feel sorry for them? Probably not, right? It's just some random person walking down the street with a bag of groceries. What's the big deal there? I mean, maybe, okay, sorry they have to walk. I wish they had a car, but you don't really feel sorry for them. There's no genuine sympathy there. But suppose that you talk to this individual and you find out that his father just died, and so his mother is now living alone and has no way of getting her groceries. So he's taking her the groceries. But his car broke down, and so he has to walk 5 miles every single day to deliver the groceries. Furthermore, he hurt his foot. Sounds like a country song, doesn't it? Furthermore, he hurt his foot, and so he's in pain as he's having to walk 5 miles every day and deliver to the groceries as he's grieving from the loss of his father, and his mother is sick and he's having to take care of his mother. Do you feel sympathetic to him now? Yeah, you feel really sorry for him because your acquaintance with him awakens sympathy in your heart. Now what are you going to do about it? You're going to help him. That is why acquaintance awakens sympathy, and then that becomes the spring of effective ministry. So if we want our young people to have an effective ministry, we need to let them become acquainted with the needs. Notice the needs, the spiritual needs specifically, in the community around them. So it's not just acquaintance and not just fun and having a good time. No, acquainted with the needs, and that will become the spring of effective ministry. Continuing, they should not be so loaded down with studies that they have no time to use the knowledge they have acquired. that tells us something about what kind of knowledge they're acquiring, doesn't it? If they need time to use the knowledge they've acquired in missionary effort, we must be giving them knowledge of missionary effort in their education. They should be encouraged to make earnest missionary effort for those in error, becoming acquainted with them and taking to them the truth. Wherever possible, students should, during the school year, not during the school breaks, during the school year, engage in mission work in the surrounding towns and villages. They are not to look forward to a time after the school term closes when they do some large work for God, but they should study how during their student life to yoke up with Christ in unselfish service for others. That's the process throughout education. Acquaintance, awakening sympathy, the spring of effective ministry. We give them time. We make it a part of their educational process. We make it a part of the curriculum and a part of the schedule. It's who they are to be a missionary. But then what? When they graduate, time's done, right? Off to your... No. We're not done yet. From our colleges and training schools and our homes, missionaries are to be sent forth to distant lands. While at school, they're doing what? Missionary work for the surrounding towns. Once they finish, then they go to the distant lands. While at school, let the students improve every opportunity for this work. But I want to make this really, really practical. Gospel Workers, page 278. 3 steps to helping our young people into mission service. 3 steps. Number 1, when the youth give their hearts to God, your care for them should not cease. Isn't that where we always stop, though? What's our goal? Help our young people give their hearts to the Lord. They've given their heart to the Lord. Great. Job's done. No, that's only step 1. When the youth give their hearts to God, your care for them should not cease. So that is our first goal. Teach them to give their hearts to the Lord. Encourage them. Help them be converted. But don't stop there. Step 2. Lay some special responsibility upon them and make them feel they are expected to do something. Now that you've given your heart to the Lord, you have a job to do. You're obligated. This is part of being a Christian. You have a work to do for the Lord now that you've given your heart to Him. Thirdly, let different branches of the missionary work be laid out systematically, and let instruction and help be given so that the young may learn to act a part. You've given your heart to the Lord, you're expected to do something, and now let's see where there's a place where you can work. Look, here's a place, they need this skill. You have this skill. Let's figure out how you can help. Do you see how this works? We don't just sit back and hope they find somewhere to work in the mission field. We don't just hope they find somewhere to work for the Lord. No, we encourage them. We help them in the work of the Lord. And they can gain from our experience, and we can gain from their youthful energy. We've been given a command. Finish the work. And when we complete true education, we will complete the work. Satan's object, in closing. Fundamentals of Christian Education, 541. Satan's object is effectually gained when, by perverting their ideas of education, he succeeds in enlisting parents and teachers on his side. How does he enlist parents and teachers on his side? He perverts their ideas of education. What did we read at the very beginning? That is the reason our youth are not religiously inclined? False education. Satan is doing a masterful work through false education. A wrong education starts the mind on the road, often starts the mind on the road to infidelity. How much time do I have? Do I have time for a story?
Yes.
2 of you said yes.
That's a majority.
That's a majority? Okay, I'll take it.
2 or 3.
2 or 3. I'll tell you a quick story. It's about a school that I've worked with, and it's an example of true education. Now, I don't want you to get the wrong idea here. I like to tell this story, and people come up to me, I want to send my kids to this school. No, that's not why I'm telling the story. I'm telling a story to illustrate to us that God's plans work.
Amen.
Do God's plans work?
Amen.
God's plans work. It's in the country of Tanzania, and in 2001, the Tanzanian government made it illegal for a child to stay at home anymore. They were required to go to school at age 6, and so they have an entire generation of young people who have been through the school system And according to the statistics from the United Nations, they've done a great work, and 96% of children are in the schools, and it's been a great success. But the real story is it's not been a success, actually. In fact, many, many young people, 2/3, I believe, do not finish secondary school. They fail for various reasons. Teen pregnancies are very common, and if a girl gets pregnant, she's expelled from school, no hope for finishing. There's child domestic labor issues. There's just the fact that they're sent to school too early and with poor teaching methods, and they can't succeed well in school. There's a plethora of reasons, but of course, just the fact that we're pulling them out of their villages and out of their homes and sending them to school is a whole other factor. The point of it is, though, significant populations of young people who fail and who have, according to the world, no future. They're not respected by their communities because they have not finished school. They have no way of supporting themselves because they have no skill that they learned in school. And they, of course, don't have any spiritual instruction. So they end up living on the streets often. They get involved in crime. They get involved in the ways of the world, and they don't have much future. So in 2004, a mission in Tanzania decided they wanted to do something about this problem. So they started an agriculture school. What a great idea, right? Agriculture is the A, B, and C of education. It's the very first work that should be started upon. So let's do that. They started an agriculture school because they knew in the country of Tanzania, if a young person could grow their own food, they could support themselves. So very simple. The young people would come. They would grow all their own food. And when I say self-sufficient, I really mean it. They actually grew everything they eat. They even grew their own oil by growing sunflowers and pressing it into oil, like completely self-sufficient. They have these little farm units of about 20 students each, living there with the teachers, working with the teachers, engaged in everyday life and eating and worship time and everything right there with the teachers. Every student has their own garden, their own field, their own orchard. Without getting into taking all the time and getting into all the details, it's a great manual training agriculture-based program. And they began teaching other practical skills too, sewing for the girls and carpentry and beekeeping and livestock and different things like that. And for a couple of years, it was very, very successful. And then they realized, wait a second, we're missing 2 areas of education, right? They only had the physical. We only had physical. What about mental and spiritual? Well, that's really hard to do when you have students who have failed school. How are you going to teach them these mental skills, these academic principles or academic skills that they failed already? But they said, well, let's try. That's hard to do when everyone's running a farm. Where do you find the time to go study? They managed to find 2 hours a week to study the academics. And they went through this, and when the students are done, they can go take these tests, and many of them are scoring with some of the best scores in the country. Because God's methods work, right? But that was only 2 areas. What about the third one? Spiritual. Well, that's hard to do because these students are coming from the villages. They're not Adventists, let alone, some of them not even Christian, many of them not even Christian. How do you take students from that background and bring them in spiritual things? Well, there's a church there, there's a choir there they can be a part of, but I tell you the most significant factor in their success has been the fact that the students and teachers are there together. And this is why we are counseled against dormitories in our schools. The students and teachers are to develop a relationship with their teachers. So as these students are working with the teachers have to grow their own food just like the students. They are working with this common goal, and they have this relationship. And so when the students are wondering about spiritual things, they have a friend they can ask. And these teachers are guiding them in the ways of the Lord, teaching them spiritual things, teaching them how to have devotions, teaching them the principles of the Bible. To make a long story short, in the 10 years that this program has been operating in its entirety, wow, it's been longer than that now, almost 15 years that it's been going fully, 99% of those young people have left baptized Seventh-day Adventist Christians. How many of our young people, I don't say this critically, but let's think, how many of our young people are going into our universities Adventist and leaving not? When here's a place that is following true education, taking young people with no interest in spiritual things, sending them forth before they had no future, What's their future now? They have a certificate. They're respected by their communities. They have a skill they can support themselves and their families with. But most importantly, they have a relationship with the Lord, and they're going back to their villages as missionaries. Why don't we have 100 of these schools in every country? We can, because it can be in our families. The spirit of prophecy makes it very clear. The home and the school can be one. We don't need to look to some institution. It's great to hear a story like this, right? It encourages our faith. It tells us that God's plans work. But we don't need to look to an institution to do the work that God has given us to do. We can have an educational center like that in our families. We can send our young people forth as missionaries to finish the work on this earth. And when we take that, when we do that in its entirety, we can go home. We can finish this work. It was the year 1938. Elder Francis Millard and Dr. Toshio Yamagata were going to, from the Japan Union Mission of Seventh-day Adventists, were going to visit Dr. Mizuno, who was the director of government and the government leader of religious education for the nation of Japan. This was at a time when many of the religious schools in the nation were being closed. And these men from the Adventist mission were there to ask permission to keep their school open. They explained their plan to the government leader. They said, we have a unique system of education. We have harmonious development of the physical, the mental, and the spiritual. And they explained to him that they were telling a government leader, we follow a plan in a book called Education, written by Ellen White. He listened to their explanation. He let them take their time. And when they finished, he said, I've already read your book, Education. I know what your plan is. And I'll tell you this. If you follow your plan, you have no reason to worry. You can keep your school open. But if you do not follow your plan, you have no reason to exist. No reason to exist. We've been given a plan. We've been given a unique program that will prepare a generation of missionaries to finish the work. It's different from the world. Amen? Amen. It's different from the world, and that is okay. In fact, that's the point. Because if we try to be like the world, we take away the reason for our existence. If we try to be like the world, we might as well just be another denomination filling pews on Sabbath. That's not why we're here. We're here to finish the work. Amen. And if we follow true education, we can do that. And in His wisdom, the Lord has decreed that the family will be the greatest of all educational agencies. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for your plan. We thank you that you see the end from the beginning. And we're sorry, Lord, for where we have not trusted you in following your plan. But Lord, I want to ask for help and wisdom in following it completely. We do not want this treadmill to continue. We do not want to stay on this earth any longer. You're waiting for us. Please help us to take hold of this work, to press forward to the goal that you've given us, to follow your plan of true education, to prepare that generation of missionaries. Lord, we just thank you for the time we've had this evening to study. And we ask for your blessing upon our night of rest, that you will help us to all rest well, even though the beds may be uncomfortable here in camping, but we just ask that we'll all rest well. We'll wake refreshed in the morning, that our minds will be clear and ready for the blessing that you have for us throughout this Sabbath day. And it is in Jesus' name that we ask and pray.